Tonight was one of the most intense nights of the entire conflict. There have been reports of a series of massive strikes on military infrastructure in Ukraine. The targets were military-industrial complex enterprises, airfields, and supply depots. At the same time, there were reports of the use of strike drones and cruise missiles. The picture of events appears to be large-scale and carefully planned. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, the strikes were carried out simultaneously in many areas. News reports mention more than 140 facilities that were used to supply the Ukrainian armed forces with equipment and ammunition. As a result, power outages were reported in several regions of the country, and eyewitnesses in Kyiv filmed a large fire in a government building. These events are a new sign that the operation is entering a more decisive phase. The situation is causing concern not only in Ukraine but also beyond its borders. International observers are discussing what goals the Russian military is pursuing and how the Ukrainian leadership will respond. Before going into detail, I would like to remind viewers that you are on a channel where we analyze all the important events on a daily basis. Subscribe now so you don't miss new episodes and get an objective view of what is happening. The events are driven not only by military logic but also by the political context. Volchansk, Kupiansk, and areas of the Kharkiv region are once again in the spotlight. Last night, the Russian Federation's air defense forces reported intercepting more than 60 drones that were attempting to attack targets in border regions. Meanwhile, Russian strike forces were hitting targets on Ukrainian territory. Each new day brings news that the parties are using increasingly diverse means of combat. Whereas previously the emphasis was on artillery, now unmanned systems, high-precision missiles, and electronic warfare are coming to the fore. There is an escalation that is forming a new dimension of the conflict. Sources note that the attack began late at night. The first reports of explosions came from Kremenchug, then detonations were reported in Kryvyi Rog, and later news came from Odessa and Zaporizhia. Kiev found itself in the spotlight when the Cabinet of Ministers building caught fire. Residents filmed the events on their phones, and thick clouds of smoke rose above the government quarter. These images spread across all news platforms. Ukrainian officials were quick to claim that the fire was caused by debris from a drone, but independent sources confirmed that the building in the center of the capital was hit. The international media immediately picked up on the story, linking it to a new wave of strikes by Russia on Ukraine's infrastructure. In this situation, a logical question arises. What is the purpose of such tactics and what will happen next? Viewers see only fragments of what is happening, but when all the pieces of the puzzle are put together, the picture becomes complete. On the one hand, Russian forces are increasing pressure in key areas, while on the other hand, Ukrainian formations are trying to hold their positions by deploying reserves and transferring special forces trained abroad. We will discuss all of this further in our detailed report. We will analyze the preparation of the operation, explain the reasons for choosing these particular targets, look at the reaction of the parties and the international community, and then discuss possible scenarios for further developments. When analyzing the events of the last few days, it becomes clear that such a large-scale operation could not have been spontaneous. Such strikes are prepared in advance, involving dozens of types of weapons and hundreds of specialists. The main idea is clear. Russia is demonstrating its ability to deliver precise and systematic strikes against key Ukrainian infrastructure. Official reports say the goal was to disrupt the logistics and supply of Ukraine's armed forces. The targets included fuel and ammunition depots, railway junctions, repair facilities, airfields, and headquarters. The choice is not accidental. It is precisely these points that allow the Ukrainian army to hold the front. If these links are broken, the ability to continue resistance is sharply reduced. The historical context plays a special role. Over the past few months, Volchansk and Kupiansk have become symbols of stubborn resistance. It was from here that the Ukrainian armed forces shelled the Belgorod region using 120 and 155 mm artillery. Seizing control of these areas means reducing the threat to Russia's border towns and at the same time expanding the springboard for further action. According to sources in the security forces, a Ukrainian border guard special forces unit trained by American instructors has been deployed to Volchansk. This fact underscores the international dimension of the conflict. Western countries are not limiting themselves to supplying weapons. They are training personnel, advising the command, and effectively accompanying Ukrainian units in combat operations. In this situation, strikes on targets deep inside Ukrainian territory appear not only as a military move, but also as a political signal. Moscow is demonstrating that any attempts to increase support for Kyiv will be met with an asymmetrical response. The statement about the possible use of a record number of strike drones was particularly alarming. Publications mentioned a figure of up to 700 units. Even if this is an estimate by monitoring channels, the scale speaks for itself. The picture of the night attack unfolded by the hour. First, strikes hit targets in Kyiv. Eyewitnesses reported a huge fire in the Cabinet of Ministers building. Then reports came in from Kryvyi Rih. There were power outages and damage to infrastructure facilities. In Kremenchug, the strikes affected the bridge across the Dnieper and the dam area in Svetlovodsk. In Odessa, the targets were in the port and at the military airfield. In Zaporizhia, the strikes hit a chemical plant and an abrasive factory. The Ukrainian side reported that air defenses were working, but dozens of videos appeared on social media showing explosions and fires on local streets. Residents of Kyiv, Dnipro, Kharkiv, and other cities broadcast the events in real time. The roar of drone engines, flashes on the horizon, and the sounds of air defense systems created an atmosphere of anxiety and chaos. At the same time, Ukrainian drones became more active in Russia's border regions. According to the Ministry of Defense, 69 drones were shot down in just one night. The incidents occurred in the Belgorod, Kursk, Bryansk, and Krasnodar regions. In Krasnodar, one of the drones caused a fire in a garage where pyrotechnic devices were stored. In the Seversky district, debris from the aircraft fell on the territory of an oil refinery, causing a fire in a technological installation. The synchronization of these attacks suggests that both sides are trying to disable important enemy targets. Russia is striking Ukraine's industry and logistics, while Ukraine is trying to weaken Russia's economic infrastructure by attacking oil refineries and enterprises. It is important to note that, unlike in previous periods, there is now an increase in the intensity of drone use. This is a new dimension of the conflict, where the front line runs not only along the trenches, but also in the air. Each drone becomes an instrument of pressure, and their mass use creates an additional burden on air defense systems. People remain at the center of the story. Russian servicemen report cases where precision artillery strikes have managed to hit enemy concentrations in tunnels or fortified structures. Ukrainian fighters, in turn, continue to receive reinforcements and are actively defending themselves. Thus, we see that the night operation was complex in nature. It included cruise missiles, strike drones, artillery support, and ground operations. All elements were synchronized and aimed at simultaneously destroying Ukraine's supply lines and sending a political signal to external players. The massive strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure immediately caused a wide political resonance. Officials in Kyiv were quick to claim that air defenses had shot down most of the targets, but footage from various regions shows that some of the strikes reached their intended targets. The international media reflected the duality of the situation. Some publications emphasized the scale of the destruction, while others cautiously referred to statements by the Ukrainian authorities. Volodymyr Zelensky made a statement in which he again stressed the need for urgent support from Western countries. He said that Ukraine faces a growing threat and needs additional air defense systems. These words came amid reports that the United States and European Union countries are discussing new military aid packages. The Russian leadership, in turn, emphasized that the strikes were carried out exclusively on targets related to military infrastructure. It was stressed that these were ammunition depots, troop deployment sites, and enterprises involved in the defense complex. The Russian Ministry of Defense noted that these actions were in response to drone attacks and artillery shelling of border areas. The Russian president's statement at the Eastern Economic Forum caused a particular stir. He reminded listeners that the presence of NATO troops on Ukrainian territory would be considered a legitimate target for the Russian military. These words sparked heated discussions in European capitals. Many analysts emphasized that Moscow is demonstrating a tough stance and a willingness to respond to any attempts to draw NATO directly into the conflict. In the United States, retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis noted in his video blog that Vladimir Putin's statement had made a strong impression on the Ukrainian leadership. In his opinion, Zelensky understands that NATO intervention could lead to direct confrontation with Russia, which would have extremely serious consequences. The American analyst added that the Ukrainian leader will try to enlist the support of Western countries, but in the end, he will still have to take Moscow's position into account. Meanwhile, Ukrainian sources have reported that a Special Forces unit of the Border Guard Service, trained by American instructors, has been deployed to the front. This fact has become yet another reason to discuss Washington's role in the ongoing events. Russian commentators emphasize that the United States is involved in the conflict not only by supplying weapons, but also by directly training personnel. The reaction in Asian countries has been more restrained. China once again called for negotiations, stressing the need for a peaceful solution. India limited itself to a brief statement on the importance of stability in the region. Turkey expressed concern about the intensification of hostilities, especially in areas related to grain transit and transport infrastructure. In the Middle East, many states view events through the prism of their own interests. Rising oil and gas prices create new opportunities for them, but at the same time increase the risks of instability. Some analysts note that each new escalation in Europe is reflected in fluctuations in global markets. Thus, the night strikes have become not only a military but also a political event. They have emphasized that the conflict cannot be viewed exclusively in a local context. It involves the world's major players, each pursuing its own goals. For some, it is a matter of security, for others, a tool of pressure, and for still others, an economic calculation. At the same time, it is important to understand that the information war is continuing in parallel with the military one. Each event is covered in different interpretations. For viewers abroad, footage of the fire in Kyiv looks like a tragedy and a sign that the Ukrainian capital remains vulnerable. For Russian viewers, it is a demonstration of the accuracy and power of the armed forces. For the average European, it is a reminder that the conflict is not subsiding and could affect the entire region. This intertwining of interpretations and reactions makes the situation even more tense. Each new action by the parties becomes a reason for diplomatic statements, sanctions, and high-level meetings. The international arena has effectively become a field where the conflict around Ukraine is discussed no less than within the country itself. When we talk about the future of this conflict, we need to consider several levels at once: military, political, economic, and informational. All of them are closely intertwined and form a common picture, where every action by one side provokes a response from the other. From a military point of view, the night strikes indicate that Russia is increasing pressure on Ukraine's infrastructure. If the pace continues, we can expect serious disruptions in the supply of Ukraine's armed forces. Disruption of rail transport and the destruction of bridges and energy facilities will inevitably slow down the transfer of reserves and equipment. In the short term, this could change the balance of power in certain areas of the front, including Kupiansk and Volchansk. In response, Ukraine will most likely intensify drone attacks on Russia's border regions. We have already seen how such actions have led to fires at oil refineries and damage to infrastructure. It can be assumed that such attacks will become more frequent and will be aimed at diverting enemy resources and inflicting symbolic damage. Politically, tensions will keep rising. Ukraine will be more active in asking its Western allies for new air defense systems, long-range missiles, and financial support. The United States will most likely agree to further deliveries, but each time the issue of aid is becoming more controversial in Congress and among the public. In Europe, the situation is even more complicated. Domestic economic difficulties are prompting some politicians to exercise caution, but at the same time, pressure from Washington is forcing them to continue their policy of supporting Kyiv. There are three main scenarios for how events could unfold. The first scenario is a continuation of the war of attrition, with both sides gradually wearing each other down. In this case, attacks on infrastructure will become a common feature of the conflict, and the front line will move slowly. This option is the most likely in the coming months. The The second scenario is a sharp escalation involving the direct involvement of NATO forces. There are no signs of readiness for such a step in the public statements of European leaders, but discussions are ongoing. If even a small unit officially enters Ukrainian territory, Russia will perceive this as a challenge. The response could be harsh, and the consequences are difficult to predict. The third scenario is the start of negotiations. In theory, this could be prompted by Western society's fatigue with the protracted conflict, as well as the economic consequences for all sides. China and other countries have long advocated a diplomatic settlement. However, at the moment, Kyiv categorically rejects the possibility of direct dialogue with Moscow, and Moscow is setting conditions that the Ukrainian leadership considers unacceptable. Special attention should be paid to the information dimension. Each new strike is accompanied by an avalanche of reports on social media and in the press. Videos of fires, footage of flying drones, statements by politicians, all this shapes perceptions of what is happening. In a situation where the global audience is divided into camps of supporters and opponents of each side, the struggle for interpretation of events becomes no less important than the struggle on the battlefield itself. The international community is likely to intensify its rhetoric on the need for de-escalation in the near future. The United Nations may hold new meetings calling for a ceasefire. However, experience from previous years shows that such statements rarely translate into real action. The major players are interested in maintaining their influence and are using the conflict as a tool to exert pressure on each other. In the short term, new massive attacks can be expected. Ukraine will try to strengthen its own air defense capabilities, but if the strikes are carried out comprehensively and from different directions, it will not be possible to completely close the sky. On the other hand, Russian regions will also remain vulnerable to drones and sabotage. Thus, the outlook is alarming. Most likely, the conflict will continue to develop according to a scenario of increasing attrition, where each side will try to inflict damage on the enemy deep within its territory. The political prospects for negotiations remain unclear, and the international community will limit itself to words of support and statements about the need for peace. One thing is clear in this complex picture. The coming weeks will be a test for both sides. It will become clear whether Kyiv is capable of maintaining supplies to its army and whether Moscow is prepared to continue such an intense pace of operations. Summing up the events of last night and the entire past week, we can say that we have witnessed an important stage in the conflict. The large-scale operation involving drones and cruise missiles showed that Russia is ready to use a comprehensive approach to put pressure on Ukraine's infrastructure. Simultaneous strikes on dozens of targets in different regions demonstrated a high level of coordination and careful preparation. In response, Ukraine continues to take active measures on Russian territory, attempting to hit strategic targets and cause internal tension. Russian air defense forces have recorded dozens of downed drones, but some of them reach their targets and cause fires or damage. This is a new dimension of the war in which the front line now extends not only along the line of contact, but also deep into the territories. The political background is becoming increasingly tense. Kyiv is turning to its Western allies for additional assistance, and the West is promising new supplies, but internal divisions and public fatigue are complicating the process. Moscow, in turn, emphasizes that it is ready to respond to any intervention, including the hypothetical appearance of NATO troops on Ukrainian territory. These signals are taken extremely seriously and are causing alarm in international circles. What can be said about the prospects? The likelihood of a quick end to the fighting seems low. A scenario of protracted confrontation remains the most realistic. Each side will continue to attack the other's targets, trying to weaken its resources and force it to concede in negotiations. However, negotiations in the near future are unlikely. Kyiv is not ready for direct dialogue, and Moscow is putting forward conditions that the Ukrainian leadership does not accept. On the international stage, there are increasing calls for de-escalation. China, India, Turkey, and other countries are calling for negotiations, but these calls remain just words for now. Peace initiatives are not being followed up with practical action. In conclusion, I would like to note that we are witnessing not just military action, but a confrontation in which the interests of world powers are intertwined. Ukraine has become an arena for the clash of global forces, and the outcome of this confrontation will determine not only its future, but also the balance of power in the world. Our story has come to an end, but events continue. Tomorrow we will hear new reports, new updates, and new statements. To stay informed and get the full picture of what is happening, stay with us. Subscribe to the channel right now so you don't miss new episodes. There are many important and alarming developments ahead, and together we will be able to analyze every step, every decision, and every consequence.